Have you ever wondered what cannabis truly does to your soul, beyond just relaxation or recreation? You might have heard it called sacred, even mystical. But what if there's a deeper hidden truth about this ancient plant that we've forgotten? Today we'll journey through centuries of wisdom and lost rituals to reveal what cannabis can really show us if we approach it with the right mindset. This isn't just about getting high. It's about going deeper, discovering something profound about ourselves that perhaps we weren't expecting. So grab a comfortable seat, stay tuned until the end, and uncover a secret the ancients knew, but modern society has overlooked. And if you find value here, please subscribe to support our channel. We've got plenty more insights to share. Across diverse cultures and timelines, cannabis has held a reputation that straddles the line between sacred substance and ordinary indulgence. However, the perspective presented in the content we are examining weaves a thread of reverence back into the conversation, reminding us that this ancient plant was once intimately bound to ceremonies, prayers, chants, and communal bonds. From the sadhus of India, sitting in silent meditation in Himalayan caves, to the Taoist alchemists experimenting with herbal mixtures for lucid dreams, and even to the Rastafari communities gathering in circles for reasoning sessions, the historical use of cannabis has rarely been a casual, solitary act. Instead, it was anchored in ritual, a means for seeking communion with higher truths or unveiling layers of the self. That profound heritage stands in stark contrast to much of our modern, legal but casual cannabis landscape. The video content referenced in our summary calls attention to how we have drifted from these ancient, holistically mindful traditions and settled for an often superficial approach to this plant. In times past, cannabis was handled with great care. It was prepared under specific guidelines, sometimes combined with other sacred herbs, and always integrated into an established framework of chanting, fasting, or communal gathering. Many who partook believed the plant could serve as a mediator between the tangible and spiritual realms. They did not seek mere intoxication. Rather, they sought a channel for revelation, a path to deeper insight into both the divine and the contours of their own inner worlds. Yet as centuries wore on and different waves of cultural and legal change arrived, much of this spiritual scaffolding was stripped away or criminalized. Eventually, Western markets reintroduced cannabis as a product, a commodity with new branding and neon-lit dispensaries largely divorced from the ceremonial reverence of its past. Underneath all these historical transitions, the content reminds us that the essential power of cannabis has not disappeared. Rather, it is we who have lost the cultural container that once guided its use. Instead of chanting or group reflection, it is now common to see individuals lighting up in the flickering glow of a television screen or while scrolling a smartphone feed. This modern approach often removes the chance to sit in stillness and truly confront the truths that cannabis might amplify, be they spiritual insights or deeper emotional states. In reviewing the themes laid out in the source material, it is vital to note that cannabis is not portrayed as evil or purely negative. Rather, it is described as a mirror or amplifier, a substance that reflects and magnifies whatever the user is already holding. If someone is burdened by unresolved fear or trauma, this plant might exacerbate that state. Conversely, if one arrives with clarity, mindfulness, and an intention for inner work, cannabis can highlight previously hidden dimensions of understanding. The essential factor then becomes not whether the plant is allowed or disallowed, but how one prepares for and interprets the experience it can evoke. Ultimately, this viewpoint calls us back to the idea that cannabis has the potential to serve as a sacred doorway. Yet that doorway only leads somewhere meaningful if we come prepared, grounded in a clear intention, respectful of the plant's deeper symbolic and historical role, and ready to integrate the insights received into our ordinary everyday lives. Only then might we harness the reflective power of cannabis as a true teacher on our spiritual path, rather than an agent of mere recreation or trivial diversion. One of the most striking through lines in the referenced content is the idea that cannabis, regardless of culture or historical period, operates more like a portal or mirror than a simple intoxicant. This runs counter to the casual modern refrain that cannabis is merely a stress reliever or recreational pastime. By invoking ancient traditions ranging from the ascetic yogis of India to the meditative circles of the Sufis, the speaker emphasizes that cannabis was once used under deliberate and often stringent conditions designed to foster introspection, self-inquiry, and contact with the unseen dimensions of consciousness. In these traditions, cannabis was not a path to forgetfulness. Instead, it was a path to remembering the deeper layers of the self. Where contemporary culture might label the cannabis state as simply being high, the ancients might have called it a state of heightened awareness, an opportunity to notice subtle aspects of one's own psyche or to connect with the guiding presence of the divine. Yet such experiences were approached with caution and humility. Fasting periods, specific dietary restrictions, cleansing rituals, or communal prayers preceded the actual consumption of cannabis. All of these steps aimed to ensure that the participant was not overwhelmed or led astray by unintegrated emotions, illusions, or personal shadows. In essence, cannabis was seen not as a direct teacher, an entity bestowing knowledge out of nowhere, but as a potent catalyst for revealing what was already present within the user's consciousness. This is why the video repeatedly characterizes cannabis as a mirror. It reflects our own hidden tendencies, fears, yearnings, and insights back at us, often more vividly than usual. If one brings chaos, cannabis might magnify that chaos. If one brings discipline and clarity, cannabis could shine a light on deeper understanding. Such an understanding of the plant departs significantly from modern consumer culture, where the focus is often on strain types, e.g. indica or sativa, psychoactive strength, or simple sedation after a long day. This interpretation also aligns with certain psychological perspectives. Depth psychologists like Carl Jung believed in the importance of recognizing one's own shadow, those disowned parts of the psyche. In a similar sense, the content suggests that cannabis can actually bring the shadow into sharper relief, which might manifest as feelings of anxiety, paranoia, or existential dread if one is not prepared to acknowledge or work through those challenging emotions. Conversely, in a disciplined ceremonial setting, participants historically channeled such an unveiling process into spiritual understanding or healing. Therefore, the critical takeaway here is that cannabis's effect, positive, negative, or neutral, largely depends on the user's internal and external environment. The text emphasizes that ritual context, whether it be quiet solitude, a structured ceremony, or a communal prayer circle, matters just as much as the dose consumed. In a hurried, unstructured environment, a person may only glean fleeting sensations or become confused by amplified inner turmoil. In a carefully tended environment, however, cannabis can function as a sacred key, unlocking new insights, forging a path towards self-awareness and spiritual growth. A particularly powerful motif in the content is the warning against false light and the pitfall of using cannabis to cultivate a superficial or illusory sense of spiritual enlightenment. In the text, there is extensive discussion of what might happen if one relies on cannabis-induced states to feel momentarily transcendent without doing the deeper and often more difficult work of psychological and ethical self-transformation. The speaker cites the danger of spiritual bypassing, a term popularized in certain counseling and religious circles, to describe a process where individuals use spirituality or spiritual practices to sidestep dealing with unresolved personal issues. In this context, cannabis may allow a person to experience flashes of insight, cosmic visions or euphoria that resemble genuine breakthroughs. However, if these revelations fade as soon as the high dissipates and the individual's fundamental behaviors, relational patterns, and ethical stances remain unchanged, then little real progress has taken place. This is likened to glimpsing the summit of a mountain in a dream without ever actually undertaking the climb. The illusions produced can be seductive, feeling elevated or special, can inflate the ego, leading one to think they have attained a higher state of consciousness or deeper wisdom when in fact the underlying shadows remain unaddressed. Historically and cross-culturally, elders and spiritual teachers have long cautioned about mistaking phenomena or visions for genuine self-realization. In yogic traditions, these are referred to as siddhis or special powers, which can distract a practitioner from the primary goal of liberation or enlightenment. The text similarly underscores that cannabis, when used irresponsibly, might intensify this tendency. Instead of guiding one towards sober introspection and humility, it might be woven into an identity that proclaims spiritual depth, but fails to engage in ethical or interpersonal growth. Thus, the content encourages a measure of skepticism and self-examination. It prompts individuals to ask, are these insights leading to lasting changes in my life? Are my relationships improving in compassion and integrity? Am I responding to stress with greater equanimity? If the answers are consistently negative, then there is a strong possibility that cannabis use has drifted into mere escapism or psychological sedation. The cautionary tale here is that pseudo-spiritual euphoria can become its own kind of addictive cycle, reminiscent of any narcotic pursuit of feel-good states rather than genuine transformation. In a more nuanced sense, the video points out that cannabis itself is not the culprit in these scenarios. It is the context and the user's intention that matter. Cannabis might be that mirror or amplifier, but if a person is fixated on feeling special or enlightened, they may simply reflect their own unaddressed egoic needs. Over time, this can become an insidious trap, giving rise to what some spiritual teachers call the spiritual ego, which is often harder to dismantle than ordinary vanity. By acknowledging these risks, practitioners can approach cannabis and any entheogen or sacrament with a sense of caution, grounding, and sincerity, ensuring that the quest for growth is rooted in stable, ongoing personal work rather than ephemeral highs. Integral to the content's perspective on cannabis is the emphasis on establishing a proper framework or container around its user concept that essentially underscores the importance of ritual context and intention. Across varying historical and cultural landscapes, communities that used cannabis in a sacralized manner did not do so haphazardly. In the Rastafari tradition, for instance, communal reasoning sessions bring individuals together in a circle, where the plant is shared with prayers, biblical reflections, or social commentary. In these gatherings, the act of smoking becomes intertwined with collective meditation and the pursuit of collective wisdom rather than descending into silent isolation or pure leisure. Similarly, Taoist alchemists meticulously combined cannabis with other herbs, such as ginseng or certain resins, and approached its consumption within a carefully choreographed set of meditative or energetic practices. The goal was not simply to experience a high, but to channel the plant's capacity for expanding consciousness into refining the subtle energies within the practitioner's body. This approach demanded that the participant already be well versed in breathwork discipline and self-regulation skills that protected them from the disorienting effects of amplifying the mind and aura without preparation. As the video commentary illustrates, this careful orchestration of environment and method stands in stark contrast to what we often see in contemporary culture, where cannabis is widely smoked in parking lots, dorm rooms, or living rooms with minimal reflective or spiritual aim. Without the psychological or communal scaffolding that older traditions employed, many individuals find themselves unaware of the deeper potential and deeper caution associated with cannabis use. The content suggests that in the absence of a conscious ritual or communal structure, one may unwittingly invite all sorts of inner or even astral turbulence, as the channel opened by cannabis can magnify not only positive states, but also latent fears, traumas, and unresolved conflicts. This mismatch between powerful plant medicine and a casual setting can lead to confusion and entrapment rather than clarity and liberation. The speaker's stance is not that modern society needs to replicate every aspect of ancient ceremonies in exact detail, but rather that we could benefit immensely by recapturing the attitude of reverence, preparation, and mindful participation that those societies upheld. Whether through personal meditation, journaling, a group circle, or a quiet moment of prayer, the idea is to re-infuse each cannabis experience with some measure of sacred intentionality. Consequently, the content challenges us to reflect on our own motives and contexts whenever we approach cannabis. Are we simply seeking a buzz or to numb ourselves from stress? Are we looking for a fleeting distraction from the demands of life? Or are we dedicating our use of cannabis to self-discovery, emotional release, or spiritual communion? By aligning our environment and mindset with a more conscious approach, we can move beyond the shallow end of escapism and step into a space where cannabis as a tool or sacrament might truly elevate our journey of inner knowing. A critical distinction made in the video content revolves around the idea of integration versus mere sensation. In other words, a spiritual or introspective practice does not simply hinge on how intensely one can feel in a given moment, but rather on how those insights or feelings translate into lasting changes in daily life. It is one thing to experience a profound sense of oneness or clarity while under the influence of cannabis. Yet it is something else entirely to carry that sense of unity and wisdom into ordinary, sometimes mundane activities like dealing with interpersonal conflicts, maintaining responsibilities, or engaging with challenging emotions without immediately resorting to external aids. The text notes that across varied cultures, cannabis was traditionally framed as a catalyst for growth, but that growth was not measured by ephemeral episodes of euphoria or comfort. Instead, it was observed in how effectively individuals integrated the revealed truths into their ongoing life path. This parallels many contemplative philosophies and religious doctrines around the world that stressed the concept of practice over peak experiences. For instance, certain Buddhist teachings caution practitioners not to become overly attached to pleasurable or visionary meditative states, warning that these states, while potentially illuminating, are still fleeting phenomena. What truly matters is whether compassion deepens and insight matures after the experience fades. In the discussion of cannabis, the same principle applies. The plant may open doors to new realizations about personal traumas, deep-seated fears, or a broader sense of unity and love. However, if these realizations are not actively processed, reflected upon, and integrated, they risk becoming empty flashes of insight that fade. That is, one might continuously chase the feeling of revelation while neglecting the actual labor of embodying what was revealed. This can create a cycle of dependence where the user repeatedly returns to cannabis seeking that same spiritual or emotional high, rather than using it as a springboard to cultivate the changes needed in everyday relationships and behaviors. Furthermore, the text argues that genuine integration often involves discomfort and the slow, steady discipline of self-examination. Processing emotional baggage, making amends, changing unhealthy patterns, these are not tasks typically accomplished through a single burst of visionary ecstasy. They demand consistent effort, humility, and sometimes guidance from mentors or supportive communities. Ancient cannabis-using cultures recognized this, embedding the plant in communal, often guided structures where the user was encouraged to share insights and receive feedback. In this way, the ephemeral experiences of the session could be anchored into communal memory and personal responsibility. Ultimately, the call to focus on integration is a call to honor the complexity of the spiritual path. Cannabis might provide a glimpse of clarity or a cathartic release, but only the individual can choose to assimilate those lessons over time. The content underlines that it is precisely in the day-to-day realm, dealing with chores, conflicts, ambitions, and relationships, where real transformation is tested. Hence, without a pathway for integrating these revelations into practical lived wisdom, even the most astonishing cannabis-induced experiences can remain nothing more than fleeting sparks in the night. Another centerpiece of the video's message is the necessity for grounding and protection in any practice involving the deliberate alteration of consciousness. Several times, the speaker or narrator underscores that cannabis, much like other potent substances, can render an individual's mental, emotional, and even energetic boundaries more permeable. In practical terms, this can manifest as heightened sensitivity, more intense emotional swings, or even a sense of encountering presences or energies beyond one's usual scope of awareness. From a more esoteric viewpoint, some traditions suggest that opening oneself up without proper anchoring can invite chaotic or negative influences, entities that feed off confusion or unresolved emotional states. While some might dismiss these ideas as superstition, there is a parallel in modern psychology that acknowledges the vulnerability of individuals when their mental and emotional states are in flux. If a person has pre-existing anxiety, trauma, or dissociation, using a strong psychoactive substance like cannabis without preparation or support can exacerbate those conditions. The video references the work of figures like Dion Fortune in psychic self-defense, as well as the knowledge found in certain indigenous practices that stress the importance of a supportive framework whenever ingesting a mind-altering plant. The concept of spiritual hygiene or energetic hygiene might sound foreign to some, but it essentially means being mindful of one's mental and emotional state and of the environment in which one partakes in cannabis. This can include creating a clean, dedicated space for the ritual, setting a clear intention, ensuring that one's physical body has been nurtured, or in some cases, fasted according to tradition, and possibly employing grounding techniques like focused breathing or chanting. Some cultures also incorporate protective prayers or invocations that symbolize the user's respect for and connection to benevolent forces or the divine. One reason for these preparatory steps is that cannabis, in its capacity as a mirror or amplifier, does not discriminate between comfortable and uncomfortable truths. If a person is already in a fragile state, the heightened emotional or energetic resonance that cannabis brings can make them more susceptible to spiraling into fear or confusion. In a supportive setting, ideally with an experienced guide or a supportive community, that same heightened state could be transformed into a healing or cathartic experience. The difference lies in the presence of anchors, whether that is the stable mindset of the individual, a ritual procedure, a protective circle, or the communal container. Therefore, the content's caution is not meant to instill fear about cannabis itself, but rather to prompt a deeper awareness of the responsibilities involved in using any substance that can alter consciousness. Grounding practices help maintain a measure of stability, ensuring that whatever arises, be it revelations, anxieties, or new perspectives, can be navigated safely. Protection, in this sense, refers to establishing boundaries around one's psyche, ensuring that the experience remains a conduit for insight rather than an open invitation to chaos. When integrated into cannabis, use these steps honor the plant's historical role as a sacred tool that can both challenge and enlighten, rather than a casual commodity for momentary pleasure. The rapid commodification and commercialization of cannabis in modern times is another significant point examined in the content. Once deemed illegal or deeply stigmatized in many places, cannabis has recently undergone a shift towards widespread legalization and acceptance, particularly in Western countries. This transformation has undoubtedly brought about changes in how people access and view the plant, but it has also exposed an inherent tension. While legalization has removed much of the social and legal stigma, it has also transformed cannabis into a product marketed for profit, often without preserving any of its traditional sacred or spiritual contexts. Walking into a sleek modern dispensary, one might be impressed by the cleanliness, branding, and variety of strains and products, ranging from edibles to extracts. Yet the content asks us to consider what might have been lost in this rebranding. Historically, cannabis was not merely an object for purchase. It was woven into the fabric of religious rites, healing traditions, and communal gatherings. The plant's significance was heavily contextualized by the stories, myths, prayers, and moral codes of each culture. For instance, in places like India, it was connected to the worship of Shiva. Among the Rastafari, it was seen as a means to commune with Jah and to reason collectively about social and spiritual matters. By contrast, modern consumer culture tends to strip away the mythic or ceremonial frameworks, leaving cannabis as a commodity. Advertising campaigns often focus on its relaxing or entertaining qualities, packaging it in ways designed to appeal to consumers seeking relief from stress or a quick route to recreation. While there is nothing inherently wrong with seeking relaxation or stress relief, the content implies that such marketing sometimes perpetuates a shallow understanding of cannabis, overshadowing the deeper possibilities of self-exploration or spiritual communion that historically accompanied it. This critique parallels larger discussions about cultural appropriation and extractivism in a spiritual context where ancient sacred practices, e.g. yoga, certain indigenous ceremonies, or the use of psychoactive plants become popularized without the ethical, philosophical, or ritual underpinnings that once guided them. When stripped of these elements, a practice or plant can lose the depth that made it transformative and can even become destructive or trivialized. For cannabis, this means that individuals might habitually reach for a joint or edible with little thought, inadvertently bypassing the introspective or communal dimension that could have enriched their experience. Nonetheless, the content does not argue that legalization is harmful in itself. On the contrary, it suggests that the real issue is the divorce of cannabis from its sacred lineage. It is one thing to make cannabis legally available to those who might benefit medically or psychologically. It is another to reduce it to a novelty. The invitation here is for modern users to look beyond the bright lights of commercial presentation and remember that cannabis at its core remains a powerful substance with roots in millennia of human spiritual practice. Reconnecting to that legacy might involve reintroducing elements of intention, ritual gratitude, and communal responsibility, an antidote to the purely consumerist narrative that in many cases overshadows its deeper essence. Moving from a critique of modern society's disconnection, the content concludes with a call to integrate all these insights and rediscover cannabis as a sacred ally. This does not equate to moralizing or calling for prohibition. Rather, it is an invitation to return cannabis to a place of respect and careful consideration. If cannabis is, as the text suggests, a mirror or amplifier of our internal state, then approaching it as a teacher or sacrament can radically change how one experiences its effects. In practical terms, reclaiming cannabis as sacred might begin with simple, intentional rituals. A user might set aside time, perhaps once a week, to engage with the plant in a tranquil setting, free from digital distractions. They could light a candle, recite a prayer or affirmation, or even hold a small moment of gratitude for the plant's historical role as a spiritual and medicinal resource. These seemingly small acts transform the act of consumption from a thoughtless routine to a meaningful ceremony. Rather than rushing to get high, the individual mindfully acknowledges, I am now crossing a threshold, opening the door to deeper aspects of my psyche. In communal contexts, the content urges a re-embracing of circle gatherings or reasoning sessions wherein participants share the plant and also share reflections, challenges, or insights. This communal aspect can ground the experience, allowing each person to witness and support the others. If intense emotions or anxieties arise during or after the session, the circle can offer a network of empathy and discussion mirroring the practices found in ancient or indigenous cultures where group ceremony provided both safety and collective wisdom. Perhaps one of the most salient points is that cannabis, like any psychoactive substance, does not automatically guarantee enlightenment or healing. It only creates an opportunity, a gateway that must be consciously navigated. The illusions of a bad trip or good trip can be transcended if the user understands that the plant does not create these realities from scratch. It amplifies underlying psychological or emotional content. By bringing intention, ritual, space, and a willingness to integrate what arises, users can steer away from the pitfalls of escapism or pseudo-spiritual euphoria. Finally, the text underscores that the real measure of any spiritual practice is not how extraordinary one feels while under its influence, but how these experiences ripple out into everyday behavior and relationships. If cannabis helps someone become more patient, more reflective, more compassionate, or more willing to address their shadows and past hurts, then it is serving a sacred function. If it merely becomes another form of sedation or fleeting euphoria, then it might be time to reevaluate the approach. Thus, the overarching idea is that cannabis retains its sacred potential, but it is up to the user in the broader cultural context to rekindle and maintain that flame, rather than allowing it to remain just an ember in a world that often prizes quick gratification over deep transformation. Expanding on the assertion that cannabis acts as a kind of internal mirror, it is important to address the psychological dimensions that accompany this function. The content points out that cannabis can expose the shadow self, a Jungian concept referring to aspects of our psyche that we repress or hide, whether out of fear, social conditioning, or unresolved trauma. In day-to-day life, these elements may linger beneath the surface, only manifesting subtly. But under the amplifying influence of cannabis, they can rush to the forefront of consciousness, sometimes catching an unprepared individual off guard. According to the text, this confrontation with the shadow is not inherently negative. In fact, many spiritual and therapeutic traditions argue that truly progressing on a path of wholeness or enlightenment demands acknowledging and integrating these darker, unloved parts of ourselves. The real problem emerges when someone lacks the stability, knowledge, or supportive environment to process these revelations. If one smokes cannabis in a chaotic setting or with a mindset geared toward mere recreation, the sudden emergence of intense negative emotions can be terrifying, leading the user to label cannabis as dangerous or the experience as a bad trip. Yet the content advocates for reframing such moments as opportunities for growth. It suggests that with the proper container, be it personal discipline, a trusted guide, or a supportive social circle, feelings of anxiety, paranoia, or even sadness can be messages from the psyche about unmet needs, unresolved experiences, or hidden desires. The speaker in the video references the idea that historically individuals who used cannabis in sacred contexts anticipated this process. They underwent fasting or prayers to center themselves, acknowledging that the plant would not only show them the divine or cosmic truths, but also their own unresolved shortcomings. This interplay between revelation and potential discomfort underlines why cannabis has been both revered and feared through the ages. The ancient sages and mystics recognized that powerful tools must be handled with respect. The modern user, by contrast, might approach cannabis with the expectation of stress relief or fun, inadvertently stumbling into deep psychological waters without a map. That is why the content repeatedly emphasizes the importance of inner readiness and energetic hygiene. Preparing for the possibility of confronting one's deeper self, whether that includes painful memories or unexamined motivations, can transform what might otherwise be an unsettling experience into a transformative one. In sum, the shadow confrontation aspect is neither a design flaw nor a trivial side effect of cannabis. It is in fact central to the plant's historical role as a catalyst for introspection. When approached with a humility and awareness that ancient traditions espouse, the unveiling of the shadow can become an integral stage in the journey toward greater self-understanding and ultimately spiritual or personal evolution. This exploration of the shadow and deeper psyche naturally leads to a conversation about the vulnerability that surfaces when using cannabis without careful boundaries. The content raises concerns about astral remnants or lower entities concept that might sound esoteric but parallel modern notions of invasive thoughts, negative psychological loops, or even external social influences that latch on to an individual's unguarded state. In simpler terms, the heightened openness that cannabis can induce may leave some individuals susceptible to being influenced by fear, paranoia, or external emotional energies. This notion dovetails with the practice of psychic self-defense as highlighted by esoteric thinkers like Dion Fortune. Her work suggests that maintaining a certain energetic integrity or psychic boundary is crucial when engaging with altered states. To put it in psychological terms, a robust sense of self and emotional resilience helps the individual navigate the wave of heightened sensitivity that cannabis brings. Without such a foundation, the person might inadvertently absorb or amplify negative energies, whether from their own subconscious or from the environment around them. The content does not present this to instill irrational fear, but rather to encourage awareness that cannabis use, especially in haphazard circumstances, can accentuate vulnerabilities. If someone is already dealing with significant emotional distress or unresolved trauma, the state induced by cannabis can highlight those issues in a stark or unsettling way. Historically, cultures that used cannabis in a sacred manner had communal or ritual frameworks in place precisely to guard against such pitfalls. They would chant, pray, or conduct group ceremonies, effectively providing both spiritual and emotional armor for participants. In today's world, it is quite common for individuals to smoke cannabis alone, sometimes as a coping mechanism after stressful days or to temporarily ease anxiety. The content implies that if this is done repeatedly without introspection or grounding, it can form a cycle where underlying issues remain unaddressed, potentially intensifying over time. The difference is that in a mindful approach, one can pause, recognize anxious thoughts as signals, and work through them consciously, perhaps through journaling, therapeutic intervention, meditation, or seeking support from friends or professionals. Ultimately, the content underscores that the real risk isn't from external evil entities in a Hollywood sense, but from the user's own unguarded internal landscape. Spiritual or psychological risk arises when we open ourselves to heightened states without a stable foundation. Rather than painting cannabis as a demonic force, the text acknowledges that it is the user's responsibility to maintain mental and emotional boundaries, possibly through simple but powerful measures, like breath work, having a supportive companion present, or setting a clear intention before lighting up. In short, cannabis can open doors, but it is the user's readiness and environment that determine who or what walks through those doors and how the entire experience is ultimately processed. Another essential thread in the content is the explicit caution against confusing ephemeral cannabis-induced insights with authentic, life-changing wisdom. The narrator draws attention to what can be called the false light syndrome, where an individual experiences potent realizations or heightened sensations while under the plant's influence, but fails to integrate them in any meaningful or lasting way. These fleeting epiphanies might feel transformative in the moment, complete with cosmic revelations, emotional catharsis, or the sense of tapping into deeper truths. However, if these epiphanies do not translate into concrete changes in attitudes, relationships, or day-to-day actions, the user may be caught in a loop of seeking more experiences rather than genuine growth. This cycle is reminiscent of spiritual bypassing, where the pursuit of transcendental states becomes a substitute for real psychological or social development. The content particularly addresses a modern phenomenon where people might claim they've received downloads from the universe or attribute cosmic significance to random coincidences, yet show little evidence of personal transformation outside the high. While synchronicities and deep sensations can be valuable signposts, the text warns that they may also be illusions if we fail to anchor them in responsible living and interpersonal kindness. Historically, Many spiritual traditions have built-in checks to guard against this tendency. For example, in certain monastic settings, novices are discouraged from placing too much emphasis on visions or mystical experiences. The real test of progress is often gauged by an individual's humility capacity for compassion and ability to handle adversity without resorting to harmful behaviors. The content underscores that cannabis might produce experiences that mimic genuine breakthroughs, but these must be tested in the fires of everyday life to see if they hold. The speaker also evokes the cautionary wisdom from works like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, where the phenomenon of Siddhi's spiritual powers is described as potentially distracting. These powers can seduce the practitioner away from the true aim of spiritual liberation, causing them to fixate on the spectacle rather than the substance. In the same vein, cannabis-inspired insights can become a kind of spectacle, enthralling but ultimately superficial, if not grounded. Thus, the real question that emerges is not, "Did you see or feel something extraordinary?" but are you kinder, more patient, more aligned with your highest values after the experience? The content challenges the modern seeker to move beyond the ephemeral thrill and to cultivate lasting integrity. Sometimes this can mean setting aside the plant for a time, focusing on meditative or contemplative disciplines that fortify the capacity for self-reflection without external aids. Other times, it might mean continuing to use cannabis, but being diligent about follow-up practices, like journaling therapy or deliberate acts of service and generosity. By doing so, one ensures that the seeds of insight sown under cannabis's heightened influence actually take root in the fertile soil of everyday life, rather than dispersing to the winds of distraction. Linked to the theme of integration is the issue of chronic cannabis use and the subtle trap of confusing sedation with peace. The content details a scenario familiar to many an individual who uses cannabis, frequently feeling a soft glow of calm or comfort each time, yet noticing over the long term that little in their life is actually transforming. While cannabis can indeed offer temporary respite from stress or emotional turmoil, reliance on that respite can lead to a stagnation of deeper spiritual or personal growth. Overuse, according to the text, can lull a person into a state of passivity that resembles tranquility, but lacks the active engagement needed to address underlying problems. One might feel spiritually alive during the cannabis experience, receiving bursts of creativity or ephemeral insights. But if these insights never culminate in tangible changes, like improved communication, resolution of conflicts, or the pursuit of personal goals, then the repeated cannabis use might be functioning as a coping mechanism rather than a catalyst. There is a particular caution against forming a pseudo-spiritual identity around chronic cannabis use. Identifying as someone who is aware or woke, yet failing to make progress on the real challenges in one's life. This phenomenon can result in a cycle of illusion where the user feels they are evolving because they're experiencing so many layers of emotion or perception while high. However, the measure of actual growth is typically demonstrated in consistent action, ethical improvement, and the capacity to navigate daily stresses without perpetually seeking an altered state. Some ancient traditions recognized that the body's energetic balance could be disrupted by too frequent or unbalanced use of psychoactive substances. The text cites, for instance, how Taoist alchemists treated cannabis not as a daily supplement, but as a specialized tool used under careful conditions. The repeated message is not that cannabis should be demonized, but that it should be approached with discrimination and self-awareness. If a person finds themselves turning to cannabis daily, and noticing a gradual erosion of motivation, clarity, or emotional stability when not under the influence, it is likely an indicator that the substance is no longer a sacrament, but a dependency. The difference between reverent use and dependency can be subtle, which is why the content urges ongoing self-reflection. A brief litmus test might include asking, do I feel as though I cannot face daily tasks or social interactions without cannabis? Am I postponing addressing significant life challenges, assuming cannabis will solve or soothe them indefinitely? Do I have a stable sense of peace when I'm sober, or do I rely on the plant's effects to feel calm? Honest answers to these questions can help distinguish whether one's relationship to cannabis is beneficial or hindering deeper growth. The overall guidance, then, is to strive for a balanced, purposeful engagement with cannabis, one that supports self-discovery and healing rather than leading to emotional stagnation under the guise of calm. A vital corollary to the discussion of chronic use and potential stagnation is the emphasis on intention. Without a clear intention, cannabis can easily become a mere pastime rather than a meaningful practice. The content emphasizes that in many ancient or indigenous contexts, intention was set through prayer, ritual chants, or communal gatherings. This is because intention serves as a compass, guiding the mind's focus and ensuring that the user recognizes they are engaging with a powerful substance that can magnify whatever is within them. The modern consumer environment often downplays the necessity of intention. Cannabis is marketed with fun taglines, flashy graphics, or casual references to relaxation and chilling out. While there is nothing inherently wrong with relaxation, the text underscores that cannabis has the innate capacity to do more than soothe. It can also illuminate challenge or dislodge hidden parts of the psyche. Thus, entering a session with an aimless or purely escapist mindset is a bit like wandering into a cave with no map, no lantern, and no plan for what to do if you stumble upon buried treasure or a hidden pitfall. When the individual user takes a moment to frame a clear intention, be it healing a specific emotional wound, seeking clarity on a life decision, or deepening self-compassion, the cannabis experience can shift from passive consumption to active engagement. In the content, we see references to how different cultures would ask for the plant's guidance, effectively acknowledging its potential for assisting in personal or spiritual work. This is akin to the concept of setting and setting in psychedelic research, where both the mindset intention and the environment, physical and social context, significantly influence the outcome of an altered state experience. Moreover, intention is not solely about positivity. One can set an intention to face fears, to explore unresolved traumas, or to examine negative patterns. This level of honesty can actually be more beneficial than attempting to force a purely blissful state. The text points out that cannabis amplifies whatever is there. So if a user is harboring tension or repressed emotions, an intention to confront and understand these emotions can transform a potentially chaotic episode into a profound avenue of healing. In some, intention acts as a crucial anchor. It does not guarantee a pleasant or easy session, nor does it remove the inherent unpredictability of exploring consciousness. But it provides a framework for interpreting and integrating the experiences that arise. The content argues that historically this was part of the reason cannabis was embedded within religious or communal structures. Intention was shared, shaped by collective wisdom and reinforced by ritual. The modern revival of these practices, albeit in new forms suitable for contemporary lifestyles, could lead users to rediscover the deeper potential of cannabis. Without intention, the plant remains powerful, but unguided like a river. Without a channel, it can cause flooding rather than flourishing. A recurring theme in the content is the notion of amplification, and this extends not just to psychological states, but also to the realms of social and cultural dynamics. For centuries, cannabis was integrated into communal rites, be it the Rastafari reasoning circles, the Sufi gatherings involving chants and poetry, or the Taoist communities experimenting with herbal formulations. In these traditions, the circle or communal container was crucial. It provided collective grounding opportunities for shared reflection and a sense of belonging that could help individuals anchor whatever insights or challenges emerged during their cannabis experience. Contrast this with the frequently individualistic approach common in modern society. Smoking alone, often in front of a screen, might initially feel comforting, but it removes the interpersonal dimension that many traditions believed was vital for harnessing the plant's true benefits. The content suggests that when experiences are shared in a group, particularly if the group holds a collective intention such as healing spiritual inquiry or moral reflection, the amplified state induced by cannabis can foster empathy, unity, and deeper conversations about life's ultimate questions. In historical contexts, cannabis ceremonies were often accompanied by drumming, chanting, or singing. These rhythmic activities served multiple purposes. They helped participants enter a trance-like state that could smooth the transition into altered consciousness, and they acted as a communal thread reminding everyone involved that they were part of something larger than their individual mindscape. When difficulties or negative energies arose, the group support and the communal rhythm could function as a kind of protective and guiding force, ensuring no single participant was left isolated in their distress. The speaker's reflection on modern life hints at how we might adapt these communal principles to our current environment. For those who wish to explore cannabis, spiritually forming small circles of trusted friends or community members who share similar intentions could recreate a semblance of the protective and supportive atmosphere that older cultures considered essential. Activities like guided meditation, collective chanting, or simply sharing personal insights after a session can help transform cannabis from a self-isolating indulgence into a shared pathway of growth and understanding. Moreover, these communal gatherings can serve as a method of accountability. If someone in the group is repeatedly using the plant to escape rather than explore, or if they exhibit signs of addiction or emotional avoidance, the group setting can gently bring this into awareness. In a solitary context, an individual might go unchecked for months or years, rationalizing their behavior and missing the opportunity for constructive feedback. Thus, while the text values personal introspection, it also extols the virtues of communal synergy. Historically, cannabis was rarely an isolated affair, and reclaiming its communal roots can amplify not just the plant's psychoactive properties, but also its potential to foster deeper human connections, empathy, and collective spiritual insight. Delving deeper into historical practices, the content draws special attention to the ways in which certain cultures meticulously prepared themselves and the cannabis before any session. This preparation went beyond physical handling of the plant and included spiritual, emotional, and physical readiness on the part of participants. Taoist alchemists might combine cannabis with specific ingredients to balance its effects. Indian sadhus might fast chant mantras or bathe in sacred rivers before inhaling the smoke. Rastafari circles invoke scriptural passages or share communal prayers that align the group's energy with higher moral and spiritual ideals. The significance of such preparation is twofold. Firstly, it acknowledges that cannabis is not a casual substance, but one that can have profound psychological and spiritual effects. By approaching it mindfully, the user signals to their own psyche, and possibly to the collective consciousness, that they are seeking something deeper than mere pleasure. This mental priming can help shape the outcome of the experience, steering it toward introspection, healing, or revelation. Secondly, preparation functions as a safeguard. It ensures that the body, mind, and spirit are in a suitable condition to handle the insights or emotional surges that might arise. It is not unlike preparing for a strenuous journey, one would gather. Supplies, check the weather, and ensure fitness levels are adequate. In the modern world, such extensive preparation is often missing. Cannabis is frequently consumed spontaneously, perhaps at the end of a workday when stress is high, or during social gatherings where the primary goal is to have fun. The content suggests that while there is no inherent sin in such casual uses, the user should remain aware of what they are potentially missing the chance for a more transformative or integrative experience. By not setting a time, space, or ritual, they might reduce the plant to a quick fix for relaxation, losing the deep spiritual dimension recognized by the ancients. One might question whether busy modern lifestyles can accommodate elaborate rituals. The text seems to argue that even small gestures can foster a sense of sacredness, lighting a candle, reciting a short affirmation, or engaging in 5 minutes of breath work before inhalation. These seemingly minimal efforts can create a psychological container that frames the session as a deliberate, reverent choice rather than a mindless habit. Furthermore, journaling or reflecting after the session can help capture any insights and plan for concrete changes in behavior or attitude, thereby supporting integration. Thus, the content frames preparation as both a symbolic and practical necessity. Symbolically, it acknowledges cannabis as more than a commodity. Practically, it provides a structure that can help the user deal constructively with the often unpredictable aspects of an amplified state of consciousness. Whether one chooses a fully traditional ceremony or a personal, adapted version of such practices, the underlying principle remains the same by treating cannabis as a sacred tool rather than a casual indulgence. Its potential to reveal, heal, and guide can be substantially enhanced. One of the more nuanced ideas expressed in the video content concerns the relationship between the external social or cultural narrative surrounding cannabis and an individual's personal inner experience. In societies where cannabis is treated predominantly as either a prohibited drug or a trivial pastime, the collective messages can seep into a person's subconscious, shaping how they approach the plant. If the cultural story is primarily one of indulgence and escape, it can become more challenging for the individual to conceive of cannabis as a sacred or introspective catalyst. On the other hand, older cultures that recognize the plant's spiritual dimension wove narratives, myths, and communal values around its use, effectively creating a field of shared significance. In these environments, the moment someone lit cannabis, they were reminded not only of the immediate physical effect, but also of the community's shared lineage of reverence and the ethical or spiritual ideals tied to the practice. This social container often acted as a balancing force, preventing widespread misuse. If there were rules or taboos, they were interwoven with moral teachings, thus anchoring cannabis use in a broader moral framework, rather than leaving it unmoored as in many Western societies today. The text cites the phenomenon of spiritual extractivism, which parallels the way modern consumer culture sometimes takes yoga, postures without yoga philosophy, or sells sage bundles without referencing the indigenous ceremonies from which these practices originate. Cannabis, too, has been extracted from its cultural contexts, from Shiva worship in India, from Rastafari theology, from Taoist alchemy, from Sufi mysticism, only to be repackaged as a lifestyle product in slick dispensaries. The content warns that something profound is lost when this extraction occurs, the moral and spiritual contexts that historically guided users through the psychological complexities the plant could unveil. However, the text also offers a hopeful perspective, suggesting that individuals have the power to reclaim and recreate new narratives. A modern user who becomes aware of the plant's sacred lineage can weave their own tapestry of meaning, drawing inspiration from historical practices and from contemporary, spiritual, or psychological insights. By doing so, they stand a better chance of forging a mature, responsible, and enriching relationship with cannabis, one that respects the plant's historical depths without necessarily requiring an exact replication of ancient ceremonies. Thus, the broader societal story does matter, but it does not entirely determine the user's experience. Even in cultures that have commodified cannabis, a personal approach grounded in ritual reflection and ethical consideration can reintroduce elements of the sacred. In a sense, every time an individual engages with cannabis in a mindful, respectful way, they help to shift the collective narrative away from trivialization and toward reverence, thereby participating in the slow but meaningful cultural reawakening of cannabis's sacred dimensions. From the vantage point of religious philosophy and metaphysics, cannabis emerges in the content as a bridge between the physical and the intangible. Different traditions have different names for this intangible realm in some branches of esotericism. It is the astral plane. For certain indigenous communities, it is the spirit world, and for many contemplative practices, it is the deeper layers of the psyche. Regardless of the terminology, the common thread is that cannabis can facilitate glimpses or forays into those hidden realities that are typically overshadowed by the routines of daily life. The text underscores that this bridging effect is not unique to cannabis. Other entheogens like peyote, ayahuasca, or psilocybin are also reputed to open doors of perception. However, cannabis is far more accessible in many societies, lowering the threshold for individuals to experiment without adequately preparing. Because the plant can be potent, while also being socially normalized, it can lull people into forgetting that they are tampering with a gateway to deeper and potentially turbulent domains. Historically, the bridging function was harnessed through strict protocols that ensured the traveler the user was ready to receive and process the revelations. Fasting, chanting, communal oversight. These were not random customs, but ways of ensuring the user had the requisite mental clarity and emotional stability. When performed under a teacher or guide, be they a shaman, priest, or elder, these practices helped the traveler navigate the illusions or challenges that might arise in the subtle realms. In contemporary settings, the casual approach means many travelers embark on these inner journeys without a map, often stumbling upon revelations that can be as disorienting as they are enlightening. The text suggests that this is where misunderstandings about cannabis being purely good or purely bad arise. The plant itself is neutral. It simply magnifies or reveals. The real question is whether the user is equipped to handle the unveiling of subconscious drives, social conditioning, ancestral patterns, and possibly even a sense of communion with something transcendent. By considering cannabis as a bridge, we can reframe our perspective. Instead of focusing on getting high, we can ask ourselves, To where am I traveling? What do I hope to learn or encounter? Have I prepared my body and mind for the journey? Do I have a supportive environment if I encounter difficulties? Posing these questions does not diminish the possibility of having an enjoyable or pleasurable experience. Rather, it elevates it, aligning the user's intent with a broader spiritual or philosophical inquiry. Hence, the content strongly advocates a renewed reverence for cannabis as not just a bridging substance, but a symbolic teacher reminding us that reality is more layered than we often admit. By restoring ceremonial or at least mindful use, individuals can better harness the bridging potential of cannabis, moving not only into the unknown corners of the psyche, but also returning with a refined sense of self and a deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of mind, body, and spirit. In direct relation to the bridging function of cannabis, the content also highlights the importance of conscious re-entry into ordinary consciousness once the effects of the plant subside. Many spiritual practices emphasize the return or grounding phase as a critical component of any altered state journey, whether induced by meditation, trance dance, or psychoactive substances. The reason is straightforward. It is all too easy to have glimpses of altered consciousness and then abruptly transition back to mundane routines, forgetting or dismissing the insights that emerged. The text suggests that ancient users of cannabis understood this re-entry phase intuitively. Rituals or communal gatherings often included a form of debrief or integration, whether that meant sharing dreams in the early morning after a night of vision-inducing herbs or holding a concluding ceremony that sealed the experience. In certain indigenous contexts, the final chant or prayer was just as important as the invocation that started the ceremony. It served to anchor participants back into communal life, ensuring that the spiritual or psycho-emotional energy raised during the session did not dissipate without reflection. In a modern context, re-entry often looks quite different. A person might smoke cannabis in the evening while watching a film and then simply fall asleep. Or they might quickly pivot to scrolling through social media, effectively smothering any nascent insights. The content stresses that such abrupt transitions can rob the experience of its transformative potential. Instead, setting aside time for quiet reflection, journaling, or even a calm discussion with a friend can help capture and process the thoughts and emotions that cannabis may have unearthed. This concept of re-entry underscores that cannabis is not a standalone solution for life's challenges. Even if an individual has a revelatory moment about a relationship conflict, a personal habit, or a spiritual calling while high, that insight must be brought into the fabric of daily life to create lasting change. Otherwise, the ephemeral clarity might evaporate the next day, leaving only a vague memory of what felt profound at the time. In many cases, an individual might need to follow up with practical actions, making a plan, having a difficult conversation, seeking therapy, or reorganizing priorities. Moreover, the text hints at the ethical dimension of how well one integrates cannabis-induced realizations. If the plant amplifies compassion or empathy during the session, but one returns to a daily routine of thoughtlessness or unkindness, then the moral or spiritual growth remains unrealized. This is why the content repeatedly reminds us that real transformation is gauged by what persists after the session, by how we treat others, and by whether we choose to continue unraveling our shadow side in sober states. The re-entry process is therefore not a trivial footnote, but a central pillar of using cannabis in a sacred or reflective manner, ensuring that each experience becomes a stepping stone rather than a dead end. A recurring question woven through the content is, How do we know if cannabis use is genuinely helping us evolve or merely providing temporary solace or excitement? In addressing this query, the content proposes a kind of litmus test, one that extends beyond subjective feelings of peace or euphoria. The test involves examining tangible outcomes in behavior relationships and emotional resilience. If over time a person finds themselves becoming more patient, empathetic and honest, not just during or immediately after cannabis sessions, but in daily sober life, then it suggests that they are genuinely integrating the insights gleaned from those experiences. On the flip side, if cannabis serves only as an escape hatch, allowing one to temporarily avoid stress without addressing its root causes, then the user might feel better in the moment, but will see little to no improvement in their overall circumstances. That is the same interpersonal conflicts persist, personal goals remain stalled, and old traumas continue unacknowledged. In this scenario, cannabis is effectively a bandage covering a wound rather than a tool prompting deeper healing. The content isn't condemning cannabis here, but rather highlighting the difference between symptomatic relief and substantive transformation. This reflective approach underscores the idea that cannabis itself does not bestow maturity or enlightenment. It can only illuminate a path that the individual must walk independently. Various traditions saw the plant as an aid, not a cure. The user's determination and willingness to engage in continuous self-examination remain pivotal. Indeed, many spiritual teachers, both ancient and contemporary, have emphasized that no external substance can replace the slow, often demanding work of growth. Cannabis might accelerate understanding or catalyze insights, but without consistent effort in everyday life, those insights risk fading like dreams upon waking. In practical terms, it might be helpful for contemporary users to keep a journal of their cannabis experiences, writing down any significant realizations, emotional releases, or new perspectives encountered during a session. They could then revisit these notes over the following days or weeks, assessing whether any follow-through has occurred. Doing so serves as a reality check, reminding the individual that clarity or wisdom gleaned under an altered state requires deliberate action to manifest in tangible, sober reality. Another method is to solicit feedback from trusted friends or family members. If a user genuinely believes cannabis sessions are making them calmer or more compassionate, those closest to them should notice a difference as well. If such changes are not observed, it might prompt a re-evaluation of whether the plant is being used in the most beneficial way. Ultimately, the content invites a holistic, long-term perspective on spiritual and personal development, emphasizing that genuine evolution is confirmed by one's lived behaviors and internal equanimity, not just by ephemeral emotional highs. In line with this reflective model, the content also tackles the concept of professionalism or functionality in the modern world, urging individuals to strike a balance between sacred introspection and everyday responsibilities. Historically, many communities that used cannabis in religious rites had allocated times and spaces for these ceremonies. The rest of the day or year involved fulfilling societal duties, farming, trade, raising families, or governance. The spiritual use of cannabis was thus integrated into a wider tapestry of life, rather than displacing the entire social structure. Today, some users who feel a strong spiritual or emotional connection to cannabis might also wrestle with the pressures of modern life: jobs, bills, family obligations, and social expectations. If their cannabis use becomes too frequent or disruptive, they risk jeopardizing these responsibilities, which can lead to guilt, shame, or external repercussions like employment issues. The content highlights that a truly sacred relationship with cannabis does not require one to withdraw from the world or forsake professional demands. Rather, the user can be mindful of timing, dosage, and setting, ensuring that the substance supports rather than undermines their ability to function in society. Moreover, the text suggests that bringing lessons from cannabis-induced introspection into the workplace or communal environment can be a powerful way of grounding spiritual insights in the real world. Suppose someone learns under the influence of cannabis that they have a tendency to dominate conversations out of insecurity. The real test is whether they work on becoming a better listener among colleagues or teammates, demonstrating humility and inclusivity. If that learning is put into action, cannabis becomes not just a personal sacrament, but a catalyst for improving community harmony. Additionally, the content warns against becoming too attached to the identity of a cannabis user. While it might be tempting for enthusiasts to revolve much of their life around cannabis culture, attending festivals, decorating with cannabis-themed art, or continually advocating for legalization, the text points out that this can create a subtle dependence on the plant as the core of one's identity. Historically, the plant was a companion to spiritual endeavors, not the entire focus of them. Elevating cannabis to the centerpiece of life can distract from the broader spiritual or moral aims that traditions originally associated with its use. In essence, professionalism and sacredness need not clash. One can maintain a meaningful, even mystical relationship with cannabis while fulfilling everyday roles effectively. The content suggests that this balance is actually beneficial. It ensures that insights gleaned during cannabis sessions are tested and refined in the crucible of ordinary life's challenges. If the insights hold up, then they have proven their worth, making the user both a more grounded individual and a more conscientious participant in society. Such integration is what ancient communities strove for, and it remains relevant in the modern context, reminding us that spiritual experiences must ultimately serve both personal growth and communal responsibility. Another angle the content explores is how cannabis intersects with the broader landscape of psychoactive or entheogenic plants, each of which has its own cultural lineage and distinct effects on consciousness. While the video focuses mainly on cannabis, it references how other substances from Amazonian ayahuasca brews to peyote ceremonies in North America have also been incorporated into spiritual and healing contexts worldwide. In many such cultures, cannabis is not the main sacrament, but sits alongside other plant teachers, each approached with specific rituals and for specific outcomes. For example, in some indigenous traditions of the Amazon, ayahuasca is considered the master teacher with cannabis, playing a less central, though still noteworthy role. Meanwhile, among certain North African and Middle Eastern Sufi orders, hashish was integrated into gatherings aimed at achieving mystical states of love and union with the divine. The content underscores that this diversity of practice illuminates the adaptability of cannabis across cultures and spiritual paradigms, as long as it is honored and contextualized. In modern Western societies, the conversation around psychoactive plants has grown exponentially, with more people exploring psychedelics through formal therapeutic settings or underground ceremonies. Cannabis often finds itself in a gray zone, legal in certain regions, fully illegal in others, sometimes overshadowed by the dramatic revelations attributed to more potent psychedelics like LSD or psilocybin. However, the text makes it clear that cannabis, despite its relative mildness compared to such substances, should not be underestimated. Its capacity to amplify and reflect can be just as transformative provided the user invests in setting intention and aftercare. The presence of cannabis in this broader entheogenic renaissance also raises questions about cultural appropriation, commodification, and the potential dilution of traditional wisdom. Advocates for indigenous rights and spiritual autonomy often emphasize that these sacred plants are more than chemical compounds. They carry the stories, rituals, and ethical codes of the communities that have stewarded them for generations. In the case of cannabis, the content highlights that the plant was once integral to various religious rites, Hindu, Taoist, Sufi, and Rastafari, to name a few, but is now largely marketed as a product for personal gratification. This tension calls on modern users to practice discernment. While one cannot simply replicate ancient rituals without context, ignoring the plant's cultural and spiritual heritage may lead to shallow or misguided engagement. The text suggests that by studying these traditions respectfully, users can glean insights into how cannabis has been historically integrated into moral and spiritual frameworks, thus breathing new life into their own practices. Whether a person is drawn to elaborate ceremonies or prefers quieter personal rituals, an awareness of cannabis's cross-cultural sacred dimensions can offer guidance on how to incorporate the plant in a way that honors both personal growth and collective responsibility. One particularly striking theme in the content is the insistence that the most critical part of any cannabis experience is not the intensity of visions or the depth of physical relaxation, but the willingness to engage with whatever arises. The text repeatedly emphasizes that cannabis will magnify states of consciousness, be they fear, longing, creativity, or spiritual aspiration. It is how one responds to these heightened states that determines the value of the experience. Many users might seek cannabis as a means to chase a certain mood or feeling, hoping to replicate a prior sense of euphoria or relief from anxiety. This approach can breed dependency as the user becomes attached to the repeated sensation rather than the evolving wisdom the plant might reveal. By contrast, an individual who views each session as an opportunity to witness and work with whatever surfaces, positive or negative, can develop a more mature relationship with cannabis. If sadness arises, they sit with it, trying to understand its roots. If joy arises, they explore what fosters that joy, perhaps discovering deeper layers of gratitude. The content aligns this attitude of engagement with historical practices, where users were not just self-directed explorers, but also guided by communal norms or spiritual teachers. In those contexts, encountering intense or unsettling experiences was deemed part of the path, something to be navigated rather than avoided. Teachers or elders might offer insights or grounding techniques, ensuring that the user did not become overwhelmed by negativity or conversely infatuated with the illusions of grandeur that can sometimes accompany expanded states. In modern individualistic settings, a person without such guidance could easily misinterpret the experiences cannabis brings forth. A surge of paranoia or existential dread might be seen purely as a bad trip, leading the user to avoid self-inquiry and attribute blame to the plant. The text, however, reframes these moments as opportunities for shadow work, the process of integrating disowned aspects of the psyche. Confronting such emotions requires a strong sense of self-compassion and the willingness to see beyond immediate discomfort. Ultimately, the content reminds us that cannabis is not a neutral playground, but a potent amplifier. Just as a magnifying glass can reveal the intricate details of a painting, cannabis can illuminate the subtle tapestry of our inner world. Whether this illumination becomes a source of growth or distress hinges on our capacity to remain present, to reflect, and to integrate. By consciously choosing to engage with what emerges, we reclaim the right to shape our own narratives rather than being passively swept along by intensifications of mood or memory. This stance of proactive engagement ensures that cannabis use is not just a fleeting escape or fleeting insight, but part of an ongoing journey of self-discovery and transformation. Concurrently, the content underscores that engaging with cannabis is a deeply individual experience, even though communal and ritual frameworks can provide support. Some users might find that even small amounts of cannabis prompt significant introspection or anxiety, while others can consume higher doses with relative ease. In a world that often standardizes dosages or celebrates ever-increasing potencies, the text advises caution and self-awareness, acknowledging that each person's psychological makeup and life history are uniquely shaped. In many historical traditions, the guiding elders or shamans would carefully observe newcomers to determine when and how much of a sacred substance they should consume. By contrast, modern dispensaries, though regulated by law in some regions, often present an array of potent products without offering guidance on how to integrate the resulting experiences. The difference lies in the perceived function, a commercial transaction versus a sacred trust. According to the content, what is lost in the commercial transaction model is the acknowledgement that cannabis can be as much a challenge as it is a comfort, and that each user's threshold for navigating that challenge varies. For individuals who are new to cannabis, or for those with a history of mental health struggles, adopting a mindful approach is particularly crucial. The text notes that feelings of paranoia or dissociation can arise if a user ingests too strong a dose or lacks a stable emotional baseline. In ancient communities, novices might start with minimal amounts, always under the watchful eye of mentors who could help interpret any symbolic visions or intense emotional surges. This practice of titration allowed the user to gradually build familiarity with the plant's effects. Today, replicating this mentorship might be challenging, yet the principle remains relevant. Users can adopt a personal version of titration, starting small, checking in with themselves, employing journaling or mindful check-ins, and seeking out knowledgeable peers or therapists if they encounter overwhelming experiences. Doing so transforms cannabis from an uncharted expedition into a more navigable journey where each step is measured and integrated. This individualized approach resonates with the overall theme of the content. Cannabis is a neutral amplifier, and the user's readiness, psychological makeup, and intention heavily influence the outcome. By taking personal responsibility, whether through dosage control, safe environment selection, or seeking emotional and spiritual support, modern users can chart a course that respects both the plant's potency and their own complexity. The goal is not to chase maximum intensity, but to cultivate a relationship with cannabis that fosters genuine understanding, compassion in the healing of mental and spiritual layers. An integral aspect of the content's critique of modern cannabis culture is the way it often elevates the consumption itself as the main event, while ignoring broader responsibilities of self-care or communal care. The speaker suggests that in older traditions, the cannabis ceremony was one component of a holistic lifestyle that might also include physical labor, community service, daily prayer, or meditation and moral guidelines. In other words, cannabis use did not stand alone. It was one thread in a tapestry of practices aimed at personal growth, social harmony, and spiritual alignment. In the modern setting, many people use cannabis in an isolated manner, perhaps just before bed or during a weekend gathering. While this is not inherently detrimental, the content challenges us to consider what might be gained by weaving the plant's use into a more purposeful lifestyle framework. For instance, if someone is seeking spiritual growth, it would make sense to complement cannabis sessions with regular meditation, journaling, or therapy. If someone seeks to address emotional trauma, working with a qualified counselor alongside mindful cannabis use might amplify healing in a structured way. Moreover, the text points out that while cannabis can offer temporary relief from anxiety or discomfort, it should not replace ongoing self-care measures such as adequate sleep, healthy nutrition, exercise, and strong social support. Indeed, older ceremonies often began or ended with communal meals, bathing rituals, or chanting sessions, activities that ground the body and mind, reminding the participant that the spiritual journey also includes caring for the vessel that houses it. By contrast, modern users might forget to drink enough water, neglect basic nutrition, or sacrifice sleep, all while expecting cannabis to balance them out. Hence, the holistic perspective advanced by the content emphasizes balance and integration over escapism. Rather than treating cannabis as a standalone cure, the user is encouraged to see it as a supplement to a broader suite of life-affirming practices. This synergy approach echoes the logic of many healing traditions which seldom rely on a single remedy. They combine diet, environment, community, and spiritual practice. Therefore, the real critique is not that modern individuals use cannabis, but that many do so in a void divorced from the bodily, mental, and communal dimensions that give the plant lasting transformative potential. By reintegrating cannabis into a more balanced way of living, one that honors the body, mind, and spirit users can experience effects that resonate well beyond the immediate session. They may find that their everyday stresses become more manageable, their creative outputs more genuine, and their relationships more enriching, not because cannabis magically fixes their life, but because its reflective qualities help them notice what needs attention and guide them toward holistic solutions. While the content offers a rich tapestry of considerations for the spiritual use of cannabis, it also touches on the reality that some individuals might do best by refraining from cannabis altogether. In other words, the text acknowledges that sacredness does not mandate universal participation. Certain mental health conditions, such as a predisposition to psychosis or severe anxiety disorders, might be exacerbated by cannabis's amplifying effects. In historical contexts, elders or shamans might have screened certain individuals and advised them against participating in potent ceremonies for their own well-being. In the modern era, personal agency is paramount, and individuals must often self-assess whether cannabis aligns with their constitution and life circumstances. If someone finds that cannabis repeatedly triggers panic attacks or intensifies depression, continuing its use under the assumption that it's a plant, so it must be safe, can be misguided. The content implies that acknowledging one's limits can be an act of self-care and self-knowledge, especially when the plant reveals itself to be incompatible with one's current psychological state. Moreover, the content reframes abstention not as a puritanical stance, but as a valid spiritual decision. For some, the path of sobriety might actually yield clearer insights or deeper devotion. Just as certain ascetic traditions forego worldly pleasures to cultivate heightened discipline, a modern seeker might find that renouncing cannabis fosters their personal growth more effectively. That does not negate the plant's sacred status for others. It merely underscores the individual nature of spiritual journeys. Even for those who do find cannabis beneficial, there may be seasons of life where pausing is advisable. The text points out that integrating insights can be a delicate process, especially after a powerful or disorienting cannabis experience. Taking a break to process and ground oneself can prevent the cycle of seeking continuous novelty or deeper sensations that overshadow real psychological assimilation. This cyclical approach, using cannabis intermittently and then pausing, mirrors how some indigenous groups approach entheogens. They are not daily staples, but occasional doorways into certain mysteries. Hence, the message is that cannabis, while a potentially sacred and illuminating plant, is not universally applicable in all circumstances. The hallmark of a mindful approach is discernment and honest assessment of personal well-being, and an understanding that sacredness is as much about respecting personal boundaries and health as it is about exploring altered states. By honoring these nuances, modern users can avoid the pitfall of dogma, neither demonizing nor fetishizing the plant, but recognizing it as one of many tools in the vast panorama of human spiritual exploration. The content also calls attention to the interplay of cultural memory and ancestral knowledge in shaping our attitudes toward cannabis. In regions where cannabis has deep historical roots, like parts of Asia, Africa, or the Middle East, older generations might still carry remnants of the plant's traditional significance, even if it has been overshadowed by colonial influence or modern legal frameworks. Younger generations, in reconnecting with these familial or cultural memories, can rediscover the plant's sacred dimension, bridging past and present. In societies that historically criminalized or demonized cannabis, there may be an ingrained skepticism or fear that persists even after legalization. The text notes that some families influenced by decades of anti-drug propaganda might automatically see cannabis as a destructive substance. Reclaiming a sacred viewpoint in such environments requires empathy, communication, and sometimes education to dismantle the residual stigma. By acknowledging that cannabis was revered in many cultures and that current scientific research suggests various therapeutic benefits, individuals can gently challenge one-dimensional narratives of harm. Conversely, the text warns that simply invoking tradition does not automatically guarantee respectful or beneficial use of cannabis. Ritualistic forms can become hollow if the practitioner's heart is not engaged. Merely dressing up consumption with exotic-sounding chants or paraphernalia can devolve into performance if the underlying intention is lacking. The content advocates for a genuine exploration of the cultural and spiritual roots of cannabis, combined with honest self-reflection about one's motives. For diaspora communities or those whose ancestral heritage was disrupted by colonization, slavery, or forced migration, cannabis can function as a thread connecting them to historical spiritual practices. Carefully researched and respectfully revived rituals might serve as a healing process, allowing individuals to reclaim a piece of their cultural identity. Yet the text also suggests that authenticity demands more than just surface-level adoption of older rites. It requires understanding the ethos and moral codes that underpin these rites, such as communal support, reverence for nature, and an ethic of reciprocity. Overall, the content proposes that the sacred use of cannabis is deeply interwoven with the historical and cultural context from which the plant is drawn. Tapping into ancestral wisdom, be it from one's own lineage or from global traditions that resonate with one's personal quest, can enrich the cannabis experience. However, such an undertaking should be approached with humility and care, avoiding the pitfalls of cultural appropriation. Instead, aspiring practitioners can focus on building alliances with those who carry authentic knowledge, or at least adopt an attitude of learning rather than entitlement. In this way, the journey with cannabis becomes not just an individual exploration, but also a communal act of cultural remembering and renewal. Layered into this cultural tapestry is a scientific dimension that the content does not ignore, though it frames it within a larger spiritual and historical narrative. Contemporary research on cannabis has exploded, examining the endocannabinoid system, potential medical benefits for conditions like chronic pain or epilepsy, and psychological impacts such as heightened creativity or temporary memory impairment. The text implies that science, while valuable, addresses only part of the picture, namely the physiological and neurological mechanisms. From a spiritual standpoint, the scientific lens can demystify certain aspects of the cannabis experience, showing how cannabinoids interact with specific receptors in the brain. This does not negate the ritualistic or mystical significance that cannabis has held for centuries. Rather, it challenges us to integrate two seemingly different paradigms: the laboratory findings that treat cannabis as a medicinal or psychoactive compound, and the cultural spiritual frameworks that view it as an agent of divine communion or self-discovery. The content seems to advocate for a both and approach embracing modern scientific insights while also preserving the sanctity and depth that come from historical practices. For instance, if someone experiences relief from chronic pain through medical cannabis, they could also incorporate rituals of gratitude or introspection into their dosing routine. This holistic approach acknowledges that pain management and spiritual practice need not exist in separate realms. Cannabis, in such a scenario, is not just a pharmaceutical remedy. It can also be a teacher that fosters deeper body awareness and humility. In discussing these intersections, the text underscores that the real question is not whether cannabis is a miracle drug or a simple substance, but how we contextualize and use it. If modern medical research shows that cannabis can alleviate suffering, that is worth celebrating, as long as we remain aware of the potential for psychological or spiritual misuse. By the same token, those who emphasize only the sacred dimension might neglect the benefits of rigorous scientific data that can refine our understanding of dosage safety and efficacy. Ultimately, the content proposes a synergy between science and spirituality as the ideal path forward. Recognizing cannabis as a complex plant that operates on multiple levels, biological, psychological, cultural, and spiritual, can lead to more responsible, empowered use. Such a stance requires intellectual openness, respect for scientific evidence, reverence for ancestral wisdom, and a willingness to adapt rituals to contemporary realities. In doing so, we can treat cannabis not as a battleground between science and mysticism, but as a living bridge connecting our physiology, our traditions, and our evolving spiritual aspirations. Another vital element in the content is the ethical dimension of cannabis use, which can extend beyond personal growth to include social justice considerations. Historically, the criminalization of cannabis in many Western nations disproportionately affected marginalized communities, leading to mass incarceration and systemic inequities. Now that legalization is spreading, there is a concern that corporations and wealthy investors profit from the newly legal cannabis industry, while those who suffered under punitive laws remain disadvantaged or excluded from these economic opportunities. From a spiritual or moral perspective, the text implies that truly sacred use of cannabis should not ignore these injustices. If one is committed to honor and reverence, it might entail acknowledging the social costs borne by minority communities and advocating for policies that expunge criminal records or provide equitable business opportunities. In older communal traditions, the well-being of the entire community was part of the ritual framework. If cannabis was considered a sacred plant, it was also a shared resource that contributed to communal cohesion rather than exploitation. Hence, the content nudges modern seekers to consider how their personal relationship with cannabis intersects with broader societal structures. Engaging in fair trade practices, supporting local growers, or participating in restorative justice initiatives can be part of a holistic approach that respects not only the plant's spiritual significance, but also the real-world implications of its cultivation and distribution. This shift from a purely individualistic mindset to a collective awareness aligns with the communal ethos found in many indigenous and historical uses of cannabis. Moreover, the text suggests that addressing these ethical issues can deepen one's spiritual practice. Taking concrete steps to repair harm or advocate for fairness can transform abstract ideals of compassion into lived action. Just as the plant amplifies internal states, so too can it amplify awareness of societal imbalances. If a person's cannabis use fosters heightened empathy and a sense of interconnection, it logically follows that they might feel called to confront the injustices and iniquities surrounding the plant. In this manner, cannabis becomes not just a tool for inner exploration, but a catalyst for outer change as well. Thus, the ethical dimension underscores a crucial point. A sacred relationship with cannabis extends beyond personal boundaries. It involves recognizing the plant's broader social narrative and taking responsibility for how that narrative unfolds in one's community or country. By aligning personal rituals with social activism, or at least conscious consumer choices, modern users can mirror the communal moral frameworks that once accompanied cannabis use. Such an approach can help the plant reclaim its place not only as a spiritual mirror for the individual, but also as a potential unifier and healer within the community at large. Delving further into the moral and communal implications, the content draws parallels between cannabis and other historically sacred plants, whose reputations have been altered by colonization and modernization. Much like tobacco in indigenous American contexts, cannabis was revered in various places as a spirit ally, only to be commercialized or demonized once colonial powers reshaped local economies and cultural norms. The text suggests that reclaiming cannabis as sacred thus entails disentangling it from layers of colonial bias, economic exploitation, and cultural misunderstanding. In practical terms, this disentangling might require users to source cannabis from ethical suppliers who practice environmentally sustainable cultivation and treat their workers fairly. It might also involve educating oneself about the plant's local or global history, acknowledging how colonial interventions disrupted traditional rituals. By doing so, a user can engage with cannabis not in a vacuum, but with an appreciation for the social and environmental webs that sustain its production. Furthermore, the text highlights how some indigenous peoples are in the process of reviving older cannabis-related ceremonies or blending traditional wisdom with contemporary realities. Such revivals demonstrate the plant's adaptability and continued relevance. If approached with respect, these new-old ceremonies can serve as models or inspirations for non-indigenous people seeking to form their own conscientious practices. However, the text cautions against superficial mimicry. The goal is not to romanticize or appropriate indigenous customs, but to learn from the underlying principles of reciprocity, community cohesion, and reverence for the natural world. In a broader sense, resacralizing cannabis can be seen as part of a global movement to restore meaning and intentionality to practices that modern consumer culture often deems merely recreational. Just as yoga practitioners might delve into the ethical frameworks of the yamas and niyamas, or tea enthusiasts might embrace the slow, mindful rituals of a tea ceremony, cannabis users can rediscover or develop their own ceremonies that align with respect for the plant's heritage and the user's personal beliefs. The content underscores that such a process is inherently creative. One does not need to revert to wearing ancient robes or chanting in archaic languages to experience a sacred connection. What matters is sincerity and a willingness to integrate ethical, cultural, and spiritual awareness into one's cannabis use. By doing so, individuals can break the binary of either viewing cannabis as a frivolous pastime or demonizing it as a gateway drug. Instead, they embrace the plant as a complex cultural and spiritual entity that has historically bridged realms of healing community ecology and mysticism. In the final reckoning, this approach honors cannabis not just in name, but in the tapestry of real-world actions and conscious choices that define our relationship with the sacred. Nearing the culmination of the text's argument, a pivotal idea emerges that the modern user who wishes to honor cannabis as sacred must walk a path that involves both unlearning and remembering. Unlearning refers to shedding preconceived notions inherited from rigid anti-drug propaganda or shallow commercial hype. Remembering involves reconnecting with ancient wisdom that viewed the plant as more than a commodity, whether that wisdom comes directly from one's cultural heritage or from sincere study of other traditions. In practical application, unlearning might manifest as questioning personal habits and exploring whether cannabis use is truly guided by conscious intention or simply a reflex to numb discomfort. It might involve reevaluating one's attitudes about getting stoned, shifting from a casual acceptance of dullness toward an understanding of cannabis as potentially a mind-expanding, soul-revealing tool. Similarly, remembering entails situating one's practice in a historical or spiritual framework, even if that framework is newly constructed to fit personal philosophies and contemporary realities. The text emphasizes that such an evolution in mindset is a gradual process, not an overnight switch. Most societies have embedded stigmas or superficial glamorizations of cannabis, making it challenging for an individual to carve out a new paradigm in isolation. Hence, the repeated recommendation for supportive circles, or at least a few like-minded companions who can share the journey. When a group collectively decides to adopt a reverent approach, perhaps holding occasional ceremonies, discussing insights, and actively working on personal growth, the synergy can amplify each person's commitment. At the same time, this transition does not demand a perfect practice, free from all mistakes or lapses. The content presents the spiritual journey as inherently iterative. One might attempt to incorporate ritual and reflection, occasionally fall into recreational or escapist patterns, and then return to conscious intention once the lapse is recognized. In fact, these cycles of drifting and returning are part of what can deepen genuine self-awareness. Over time, consistency in recentering on sacred intent can accumulate, gradually reshaping how cannabis is perceived and experienced. Lastly, the text points out that such personal transformations can ripple outward. As individuals adopt mindful cannabis practices, they might inspire friends, family, or community members to reconsider their own use. Over months or years, a small movement can form one that fosters a dialogue about cannabis as a sacred or purposeful plant. This is how cultural norms begin to shift, one conversation, one ritual, one act of conscious consumption at a time. By actively choosing to unlearn harmful or trivializing narratives and to remember the plant's deeper potential. Modern users can help restore a sense of wonder and reverence that resonates far beyond their personal experience. Throughout the content, there is a persistent reminder that the sacredness of cannabis is not an inherent property that magically bestows wisdom on anyone who partakes. Rather, sacredness emerges from the relationship between the user and the plant, an interaction shaped by respect, readiness, and intention. This distinction highlights a shift from a passive to an active stance. Cannabis is not something that happens to the user. It is a collaborator in a purposeful journey. When framed this way, every choice surrounding cannabis, from how it's grown or sourced to how it's prepared to the mindset in which it's consumed, becomes part of the sacred relationship. If a user rushes to light up while stressed or bored, the plant may simply magnify those states, yielding a shallow or even distressing experience. However, if the user sets a clear intention, perhaps to explore a lingering emotional wound or to connect with a creative muse, the entire dynamic changes. The content suggests that cannabis responds to this intention by reflecting back aspects of the user's inner state more vividly, allowing for deeper engagement. Such a viewpoint counters the narrative that cannabis is merely a chemical agent whose effects are predetermined by THC levels or strain types. While the chemical components do matter, the text posits that subjective factors, one's psychological disposition, spiritual inclination, and sense of ritual, can modulate or redirect the experience profoundly. In simpler terms, two individuals could smoke the same strain at the same dosage, yet have drastically different journeys if one is prepared with reverence and the other is merely seeking entertainment. This relational framework also resonates with broader ecological and spiritual principles that view human beings as co-participants in nature rather than masters or mere consumers. Cannabis as a living plant has evolved alongside humanity, weaving itself into medicine, ritual, and social practices. Recognizing it as a partner in consciousness, exploration fosters a sense of humility and gratitude, qualities often emphasized in global spiritual traditions. In essence, the content calls for a reciprocal bond. The user takes the time to cultivate an environment of respect and mindfulness, and in turn, the plant can serve as a mirror teacher or guide, exposing truths that might remain concealed under normal conditions. This reciprocity underscores that sacredness is not a static attribute, but an ongoing practice renewed each time an individual decides to engage with cannabis. By embracing this perspective, modern seekers can transform an act that might otherwise be trivialized or demonized into a profound journey of self-discovery and communal harmony, all rooted in the awareness that a sacred relationship is something both parties choose to build step by step. From a philosophical standpoint, the content effectively argues that cannabis invites a form of existential inquiry. When used with mindfulness, the plant can dissolve habitual thought patterns and loosen the grip of the ego, at least temporarily. This disruption of normal cognitive routines may lead to questions about identity, purpose, and the nature of reality itself. The text suggests that far from being idle speculation, these questions can catalyze profound shifts in how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe. To clarify, existential inquiry refers to introspection on fundamental human concerns, freedom choice meaning isolation, and mortality. Cannabis, by altering perception and emotional states, can make these concerns feel immediate and pressing. An individual might sense a fleeting oneness with the world, prompting them to reevaluate their sense of separateness or their everyday anxieties. Alternatively, one might experience a stark confrontation with their own anxieties or regrets, realizing how ephemeral life can be. While such revelations can be unsettling, the content insists they are part of the path toward deeper self-knowledge. Historically, certain spiritual traditions harnessed such existential insights through ritual frameworks that offered interpretations or metaphors, whether in the form of deities, cosmologies, or moral teachings. The user could then anchor their experience within a cultural narrative, alleviating confusion and reinforcing a sense of belonging. Modern individuals often lack such communal narratives, which can lead to confusion if existential dread or euphoria surfaces without a guiding framework. The text suggests that creating personal or shared rituals can partially fill this gap, offering a container for the raw energy that existential inquiry can unleash. Furthermore, the content aligns with the idea that existential questioning is not something to be solved, but rather continually explored. A single cannabis session might offer a glimpse of a new perspective, but the real challenge lies in revisiting that perspective in daily, sober life, examining its implications and deciding which values or goals to prioritize. Over time, repeated mindful cannabis engagements might refine one's existential orientation, allowing the individual to become more comfortable with ambiguity, more attuned to genuine desires, and more open to mystical or transcendent dimensions. In some, existential inquiry is woven into the text as a layer of meaning that emerges when cannabis is treated as a sacred amplifier. Rather than escaping from life's questions, the user is guided to face them head-on. The result can be a deeper sense of authenticity, albeit one that demands courage, integration, and sometimes the support of philosophical or spiritual systems. Cannabis merely opens the door. Stepping through and grappling with what lies beyond is the task of the thoughtful, intentional seeker. A parallel theme highlighted by the content is the idea of transformation through gradual, disciplined effort, rather than instant revelation. While cannabis can induce sudden moments of clarity, the text warns against equating these flashes with enduring spiritual or emotional maturity. This distinction resonates with many religious and philosophical teachings that emphasize the difference between a peak experience and the sustained work of self-cultivation. In practical terms, a person might experience a cannabis session that feels life-changing, insights flood and emotional burdens lift, and a sense of cosmic unity emerges. Yet, if that same individual does not integrate these insights, the momentum might fade. The next session could become a quest to recreate the initial high, rather than to build upon its lessons. The speaker in the video effectively calls for discipline in bridging these experiences with consistent practices, meditation, journaling, moral reflection, and honest conversations with mentors or peers. This emphasis on discipline parallels the structures found in monastic traditions where novices balance moments of profound contemplation with daily tasks and ethical guidelines. Applying this principle to cannabis means respecting the plant's power and recognizing that each session is but one chapter in a broader journey. The text suggests setting realistic goals, perhaps focusing on one personal issue at a time, using cannabis as a tool to illuminate it, and then devoting sober periods to follow through. This cyclical process helps avoid dependency on the plant for every emotional or spiritual breakthrough. Moreover, the concept of discipline helps manage the spiritual ego that the content frequently discusses. If individuals rely solely on cannabis-induced visions, they may become enamored with the feeling of being enlightened or evolved, neglecting the more subtle day-to-day ethical and emotional challenges. By contrast, a disciplined approach fosters humility. Each session becomes a lesson, a stepping stone rather than a final destination. Over time, the user might see steady progress in how they handle conflict, setbacks, or personal shortcomings, thus reflecting genuine inner development. Lastly, discipline in cannabis use extends to respecting physiological limits. The text underscores that the body and mind need rest, and continuous consumption can dull the very sensitivity that makes cannabis revealing. Taking breaks, monitoring tolerance levels, and periodically reassessing one's relationship with the plant are all strategies for maintaining a healthy balance. In sum, the call for discipline is not about ascetic rigidity, but about ensuring that cannabis remains a supportive, illuminating ally in a broader tapestry of intentional living, rather than slipping into a crutch or an addictive habit that undermines genuine transformation. The content also delves into the importance of acknowledging and working with the emotional energies that cannabis can unearth. While many approach cannabis hoping for relaxation or creative inspiration, the plant can also evoke powerful emotional catharsis, tears, rage longing, or childlike wonder. The text suggests that these emotional swings are not random, but reflect layers of one's psyche seeking expression or resolution. Thus, a session that triggers sadness may be pointing to unresolved grief, while one that sparks anger may highlight suppressed resentments. In a ceremonial or therapeutic context, such emotional intensity is not only expected, but welcomed as part of the healing process. Individuals are encouraged to feel deeply, to let emotions rise to the surface, and to process them through dialogue art or introspective techniques. By contrast, the content notes that in casual or recreational use, these emotions might be stifled or quickly labeled as unpleasant, prompting the user to either smoke more or distract themselves. This avoidance prevents genuine emotional integration, possibly leading to cyclical distress every time cannabis magnifies these hidden layers. This exploration of emotional energies connects back to the emphasis on communal support. Historically, participants might have had fellow practitioners, guides, or elders to help interpret and contextualize strong emotional responses. In the absence of such a communal container, the modern user might find value in seeking out supportive friends, counselors, or even structured group sessions where vulnerability and emotional exploration are seen as healthy rather than problematic. The text repeatedly underscores that the measure of a successful cannabis experience is not the absence of tough emotions, but the courage to face and integrate them. Further, the content ties emotional work to spiritual ethics, suggesting that genuine growth demands honesty about one's emotional landscape. If cannabis reveals deep resentment, the moral or spiritual calling might be to address that resentment in real life through forgiveness, confrontation, or boundary setting. Merely feeling the emotion, while high without subsequent action, can result in stagnation or confusion. The repeated theme is that everything cannabis reveals calls for a response from the user. No revelation exists in a vacuum. Thus, acknowledging the emotional dimension transforms cannabis into more than a superficial mood enhancer. It becomes an instrument of psychological excavation, prompting the user to question, what do I do with these feelings after the session ends? The content's stance is that this follow-up is where the real alchemy occurs. Whether the user chooses therapy, meditation, journaling, or heartfelt conversations, each path respects the emotional intelligence cannabis can evoke. In this way, the plant does not merely sedate or entertain. It cooperates in healing old wounds and forging new understandings. Bringing these threads together, the content ultimately posits a vision of cannabis use that transcends rigid categories like medical, recreational, or spiritual. In this holistic framework, cannabis can serve multiple functions: relief from physical symptoms, deepening of creative endeavors, facilitation of emotional release, or communion with a higher power, depending on the user's context and intention. This multi-dimensional view aligns with how many ancestral cultures related to sacred plants, blending healing, social bonding, and spiritual practice, without isolating these facets into separate boxes. However, the text cautions that to access cannabis's full range of potential benefits, one must be willing to invest time, reflection, and conscientious preparation. The plant does not automatically unify these aspects. Rather, the user's awareness and approach weave them into a coherent whole. For example, a medically prescribed cannabis regimen can be complemented by small rituals of gratitude, turning a purely clinical interaction into a partial spiritual practice. Conversely, a spiritual ceremony that also offers symptom relief underscores the inseparability of body and spirit, reminding participants that physical well-being is integral to spiritual growth. This integrative perspective requires an ongoing willingness to adapt. If one discovers that using cannabis before a creative project fuels genuine inspiration without detrimental side effects that might be integrated into a regular routine. If overuse creeps in, clouding the mind or fostering avoidance, it might be time to step back or reassess. The text suggests that such self-regulation is a hallmark of maturity. It reflects an understanding that sacredness is dynamic and must be maintained through deliberate, evolving practices rather than static rules. The content also acknowledges that the lines between medical, recreational, and spiritual usage are not always clear-cut. Someone might start with a recreational mindset and stumble into profound insights, prompting them to adopt a more reverent approach. Another individual might seek medical relief, but find that the relief opens a door to exploring deeper, emotional or existential questions. The text celebrates this fluidity, implying that cannabis's historical role has long bridged categories, offering relief and revelation in equal measure. Ultimately, the concluding vision is that cannabis can be resacralized in modern life by recognizing its complexity and by honoring the synergy between body, mind, and spirit. The content calls for a mindful revival of practices that respect cannabis's ancient lineage while embracing contemporary understanding. By doing so, we step away from polarized narratives that depict cannabis as either a dangerous vice or a trivial pastime, and we inch closer to the ancient wisdom that saw it as a multifaceted gift. A gift that, when approached with clarity and compassion, can illuminate the soul while also tending to the body and uniting communities in shared meaning. As the culmination of its themes, the content implores modern users to recognize that the journey with cannabis is not about perfect adherence to a single ceremonial script, but about cultivating an authentic relationship with the plant and with oneself. This relationship is reciprocal, just as cannabis can serve as a mirror, amplifying what lies within the user's mindset. Rituals and ethical choices feed the plant's role, shaping how its effects manifest. In practical application, the text envisions each act of consumption as an opportunity for conscious growth. Lighting the herb becomes a symbolic moment of crossing a threshold, entering a state where the veil of ordinary perceptions might lift and deeper truths or unresolved issues rise to the surface. Whether done alone or in a communal setting, this moment of inhalation can be approached with reverent silence, a short prayer, or an affirmation of purpose. The text is not prescriptive about the exact form but emphasizes the sincerity of the act. After the session, the content urges integration. If insights arose about one's relationships, creative directions, or personal flaws, these should be noted and reflected upon. Emotional releases might need follow-up, whether through journaling therapy or heart-to-heart conversations. The success of a session is gauged less by how blissful or visionary it felt, and more by whether these revelations motivate tangible changes in the user's life. Thus, each session becomes a chapter in an ongoing narrative of self-cultivation rather than an isolated event. Moreover, the text points to the importance of communal validation. If possible, sharing experiences in a supportive group can help refine the meaning of what was unveiled, preventing the user from misinterpreting or discarding valuable lessons. Healthy skepticism should also be welcomed by encouraging users to question their interpretations. The group or community can help root out self-delusion or spiritual ego that might otherwise flourish unchecked. In essence, the content's final call is a balanced integration of intention, humility, and dedication. It does not sugarcoat the challenges, acknowledging that cannabis can reveal uncomfortable truths, amplify negative emotions, or become a crutch if misused. At the same time, it elevates the plant's capacity to deepen empathy, spark creative inspiration, and nurture spiritual depth when handled with the reverence and structure it historically enjoyed. By willingly stepping into this reciprocal dance, the modern user can rediscover a dimension of cannabis that transcends policy debates or marketing slogans and instead resonates with the ancient undertones of healing awakening and shared humanity. In closing, the message resounds with an invitation to approach cannabis not as an obligatory rite nor as a mere pastime, but as a conscious choice laden with spiritual, psychological, and communal significance. The content's overarching thesis is that the plant's deepest power emerges when users remember its lineage as a tool of introspection and communion, and when they couple that remembrance with modern discernment. This does not require discarding scientific research or demonizing commercialization outright. It requires weaving them into a larger tapestry that honors the plant's holistic potential. Summarizing the main threads, we see that cannabis historically was integrated into rigorous ritual contexts spanning multiple cultures: Hindu ascetics, Sufi mystics, Taoist alchemists, Rastafari circles, and various indigenous practices worldwide. These communities established ceremonial containers, moral frameworks, and communal oversight to ensure that cannabis magnified insight rather than confusion. In modern times, while legalization has broadened access, much of this guiding architecture has been lost, leading many to treat cannabis as a commodity for pleasure or a crutch for escapism. Yet the content insists that the remedy is at our fingertips. We can restore the sacred by fostering intention, whether individually or collectively. Simple rituals. Prayerful silence journaling, setting a goal for self-reflection, can anchor a session in depth rather than triviality. The user can monitor emotional currents and integrate lessons into daily life, using cannabis as a catalyst for shadow work, creativity, or spiritual seeking. In a communal setting, circles of trust can amplify the plant's mirror effect, allowing participants to share revelations, hold each other accountable, and keep ego-driven illusions at bay. Ultimately, the text frames cannabis as an amplifier that requires us to examine what we truly want from life. If the desire is mere distraction, cannabis may grant that, but at the cost of stagnation. If the desire is genuine awakening, healing, or service, cannabis can potentially illuminate the path while demanding the user's sincerity and courage in return. The final takeaway is that the plant's significance is not confined to archaic temples or exotic ceremonies. It lives as long as we kindle its sacred aspect with honesty, humility, and a willingness to learn. Thus, the content offers not just a historical or philosophical treatise on cannabis, but a practical roadmap for those willing to see the plant as more than a fleeting indulgence. It calls for an evolution of consciousness that welcomes both modern science and ancient wisdom, forging a path where cannabis once again stands as a gateway to deeper truth, both cosmic and personal. The choice, as the text underscores, lies in each puff, each moment of preparation, and each act of integration that follows. In that sense, cannabis remains a sacred mirror, ever ready to reflect our inner being, if only we are prepared to gaze upon what it reveals and carry that vision into our everyday world. After exploring the surprising depths of cannabis and rediscovering its ancient spiritual roots, it's clear that this plant offers more than a temporary escape. It offers a mirror to our own souls. With respect and genuine intention, cannabis can illuminate parts of ourselves that are hidden beneath everyday distractions. The question now is, are you ready to face what cannabis might reveal to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Have you ever had a moment of profound insight or unexpected clarity with cannabis? Please share your stories in the comments below. Let's build a community of thoughtful reflection and meaningful conversation. Thanks for joining me on this eye-opening journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt discussions just like this one.